And they damage and vandalize public property with impunity. No one's been charged. Yet here I am, a Canadian who's paid his taxes, worked his whole life, wrote Free John on some cheap plywood, and I'm facing up to 2 years in prison. And normal Canadians need to wake up to what's going on.
Do you support the criminal charge against him, sir? And how about yourself, sir? David Menzies for Rebel News here in Toronto, and I'm standing outside the Ontario Court of Justice, and with me is Daniel Tate, and what a story this is. I think this is a story of selective prosecution and two-tier policing, because you see, the other day, Daniel wrote 2 words on a piece of plywood near Queen's Park, and now he's being charged with mischief under $5,000 and faces a maximum penalty in jail of 2 years. Daniel, let's go back to the scene of the crime, so-called. What happened that day? What made you write the words Free John on a piece of plywood?
Yeah, so myself as a Canadian citizen and so many other Canadians across the nation, and especially in this city in particular, are completely disillusioned and frankly very angry that the founder of our nation, Sir John A. Macdonald, who, by the way, we wouldn't have a country if it wasn't for him, has been boxed up for 5 years. Yes. And to me, it's indicative of a sort of moral rot that's happening at every level of government, in other institutions around us. And so I saw that box sort of representing the decline of morally upstanding people. And so I decided to just, have a little act of rebellion. And I went up to this cheap plywood box and I wrote Free John.
And what happened then? Was it the Ontario legislature, police or security that approached you?
Yeah, so again, I didn't think I would get caught for it, but I guess they saw out of the corner of their eye the Queen's Park security constables, or whatever their names are. And as soon as they saw that, it was like they just darted for me. It was like Usain Bolt 100-meter dash. They just ran after me like I was a terrorist or something, and they immediately manhandled me, cuffed me, and they brought me into the Queen's Park security office for questioning, searching, and then they got the police involved, and it was a whole mess.
Let's go back in time 5 years ago, Daniel. We know the reason for Sir John A., the statue that is being put into that makeshift coffin, was because at the time you had thugs from Black Lives Matter and Antifa routinely paint bombing the statue. Not a piece of plywood, the actual statue. Where was the Queen's Park security then in terms of upholding the law?
Yeah, that's the real question. That's the real question. And where were our political leaders at that time? And where were our police chiefs and police officers and everybody else who took an oath to enforce the law? Right? And that didn't happen. There was a period of lawlessness. But the problem is that wasn't just a blip on the radar, because when you don't enforce the law, you embolden the activists. And that essentially is what happened. And that's why not only is Sir John A. Macdonald still boxed up, but why they're renaming streets, why they've infiltrated schools, why there's ideology and dogma being proliferating across government at every level and our school boards. That's what happens when you don't hold radical ideology to account and prosecute the law. And so that's the situation we're in.
And Daniel, in the Department of Plenty of Blame to go around, I go back further in time. 7 years ago, Premier Doug Ford reached out to the city of Victoria, who was well ahead of the cancel culture when it came to Sir John A. Macdonald. They were taking down their statue, and Ford said, you have a problem with Sir John A. Macdonald, send it to Ontario, we'll find a place for it here. Maybe even on the northern lawns of Queen's Park. He went from that, doubling down on a Sir John A. Macdonald statue, to boxing it up in this despicable coffin-like edifice. What happened to Premier Ford's spine on this issue?
That's a good question, and I do look forward to Doug Ford himself coming out, making a strong statement, and backing it up with action and unboxing Sir John A. Now is the time to do it. We're in the middle of a federal election cycle. We're all supposed to be patriotic Canadians, elbows up, all this sort of like sloganeering. Okay, put your money where your mouth is and unbox Sir John A. and make a strong statement that if anybody is caught, defacing national monuments, they're going to be dealt with.
We have seen for the last 17 months in the streets of our great dominion, Daniel, the pro-Hamas thugs chanting for genocide, displaying swastikas. Some of them even engage in cosplay, dressing up as Sinwar, the October 7th terrorist mastermind. The cops don't do anything. Actually, I correct myself. The cops will bring them Timbits and coffee on a cold day because I guess it takes a lot out of you to chant genocide. I'm curious, if you were to have written Free Palestine on that makeshift coffin, do you think we'd be here today?
I really don't understand what the police are doing right now. I know they have a very tough job. They've been under-resourced for so many years because of the police defunders, again, have been entrenched in these institutions, and the cops have a hard time. But I will say the cops need to start really enforcing the law and not have these two-tier policing. There's hate rallies happening every weekend, and the aftermath of these hate rallies is we have a defaced streetscape. They deface public property, private property with hate propaganda, hate speech, and they damage and vandalize public property with impunity. No one's been charged. Yet here I am, a Canadian who's paid his taxes, worked his whole life, wrote Free John on some cheap plywood, and I'm facing up to 2 years in prison. So this is a huge problem, and normal Canadians need to wake up to what's going on.
Daniel, with all respect, I'd like to correct you. I think we know exactly where the Toronto police are. We saw several weeks ago an official podcast go up by two Islamist officers who were saying that the silver lining in the October 7th massacre was that there are more people converting back to Islam, as though the single day biggest slaughter of Jews was inspirational to convert to Islam. And that went up with the chief's blessing until the predictable blowback made them pull it down. So I would say that the police is all in when it comes to the pro-Hamas side.
Well, that was truly a despicable thing to watch, and that begs so many questions. Like, is that the exception or the rule inside Toronto Police Services? What kind of culture facilitates or enables that at the Toronto Police, and what kind of punishment was levied on those officers? This seems to be all classified information, but I know a lot of citizens want to know exactly what happened to those two officers, because it was unacceptable what happened there.
And, just the other day, and we'll throw to the clip, here's a pro-Hamas demonstrator on scaffolding setting something on fire. He could have had the whole project go up in flames. There were people walking under the fire. Check it out.
I think it's hurting the city, it's hurting society, it's making us an embarrassment to people around the world. These stories travel through the internet. People south of the border are seeing what's going on here. It makes us look foolish and like we don't have our house in order. We need to have, they're called Toronto's finest for a reason, because we're supposed to trust them that they will enforce the law, and they're not doing that. And so it's only hurting society, it's hurting normal Canadian citizens, and somebody, either whether it's the police chief, DEMQ, or the mayor, or somebody needs to fix what's going on. This is their modus operandi. They did it with Dundas Square. Yes. They try to do it with Dundas Street, this sort of erasure of what they call sort of colonial history. And they're painting our founding father, John A. Macdonald, as if he's like Pol Pot or Stalin or Hitler. And then they use like the N-word or the G-word, you know what words I'm talking about, ad nauseum. And it dilutes the importance and the horrendousness of those words. And so that's what we need to be aware of. And I'm with you. We can acknowledge John A.'s history and some of the blemishes on his record without having to box him up.
And Daniel, I know young Dundas Square, now Sankofa Square, that's a passion of yours. And here's where the cancel culture people don't even understand history. Henry Dundas, which is the name they find problematic, he was an abolitionist, but apparently he wasn't fast enough of an abolitionist. And instead we go with Sankofa, which is tied to a part of the world that in the 15th century, I understand, was a huge hub for the slave trade. Try to connect the dots for me.
Yeah, I've done a significant amount of research on what happened with what I call Sankofa Gate, because it's a scandal. It's a scandal of disrespect to the taxpayer, disrespect to residents, weaponizing and revising history to suit a modern narrative. There was no public consultation. A significant amount of tax dollars were blown on something nobody wanted, and they vilified Henry Dundas and didn't even invite any Scottish scholars or European scholars. They had one quote-unquote historian, her name was Melanie Newton, who had her own major biases. And the fact is, I did the research myself. I read the minutes of the Scottish Parliament where he said we need to end slavery. His big crime was he was the practical abolitionist. He knew he couldn't end it immediately, so he had to work through the system to eventually get it abolished. My case is going to impact other cases in the backlog of our justice system, right? Cases that actually have meaning and are important, maybe violent crimes or other crimes, are now going to be a little bit slower now in this clogged artery of our justice system because they're prosecuting me.
One last question, Daniel. I see some members of the independent media here. I personally thought when I came down to the courtroom today at 2 p.m., I thought there was going to be the proverbial media snowball, that there'd be journalists from every outlet here, because that's how egregious and outrageous I think your so-called crime is. But nobody from the mainstream media is here. What's the deal? Or are they on side with someone like you getting charged for that?
Yeah, well, I think only they can speak on their own behalf. And if they're not here, that's fine. Citizen journalism is the future.
Well, folks, after we wrapped up with Daniel Tate outside the courthouse, we decided we'd come to the legislature itself and check it out. And, check out what happened. We're doing a story on Daniel Tate, who got arrested for spray painting Free John on the plywood. Why was he arrested by you guys?
So if he committed a crime, I wasn't here, I don't know, but
Okay.
I'm not sure about the individual you're talking about, but if he committed a crime, spray painting is mischief and under the criminal code.
Oh, that's fascinating, because 5 years ago, the reason why this was boxed up was that thugs from BLM and Antifa were actually spray painting the statue. Why were none of them arrested?
I'm not sure if none of them were arrested, but if they were spray painting the statue, they would have been, because we enforce the criminal code of Canada.
But that's the point. It wasn't enforced.
I can't speak to that.
Well, sir, we can give you video evidence of that happening. And this person is facing a mischief charge that carries with it 2 years in jail for spray painting Free John on a piece of plywood. What do you say about that, sir? Do you think if he spray painted Free Palestine, he would have been arrested? Well, I'm glad you find it funny, sir. I don't find it funny at all. I find Daniel Tate to be a patriot, standing up for our first Prime Minister, and you're getting amusement out of this. How about yourself, sir? You said that spray painting the statue itself would have been a criminal act, but nobody was ever charged.
Have a good day, all right?
Okay, well, you guys approached us, so...
Oh, no, we were just walking by. That's
Oh,
all.
really?
Making
Oh,
sure
okay.
you're doing all right.
Okay, then. So you have nothing to say?
Rules, you're good.
Okay, do you support the criminal charge against him, sir? And how about yourself, sir?
No comment, sir. No comment.
No comment. Okay, then. Well, there's your Legislative Protective Services cops. It's funny, they came to us, as you saw. Oh, just walking by. It was a coincidence. And suddenly they're not censorious thugs anymore. Suddenly they're not about throwing the book at someone. It's amazing what power this little microphone and that camera has when you put these so-called police on the record. They're not such bullies anymore, are they? In addition to being censorious thugs, you know what we've learned today? They're cowards. The Queen's Park coppers, they're not so censorious when the camera is on them, are they? But you know what? We are not going to sit on our hands regarding this outrageous miscarriage of justice. We'll be back at the Toronto Courthouse on May 5th, 11:30 a.m. Hey, if you support Daniel Tate and what he stands for, come on out. Let's pack that courthouse. We are going to get justice for this person. How is it possible that chants for genocide occur every weekend in this city. Vandalism and shooting up schools and even outright violence, and the cops turn a blind eye, but for spray painting the word Free John on some plywood, that is the crime of the century? No, not on our watch. Stay tuned. For Rebel News, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. Well, folks, what happens when censorious thugs collide with cancel culture? Well, you get the Queen's Park coppers charging somebody for spray painting Free John on a cheap piece of plywood that is covering up our first Prime Minister, the founder of Canada, Sir John A. Macdonald. Listen, I know you love it when Rebel News brings you the other side of the story you won't get from mainstream media, but we need your help. If you're able to, can you kindly go to rebelfieldreports.com, that's rebelfieldreports.com, and please make a contribution.